Okay, this video is going to talk about distance and midpoint. So these two things are related. They're also related, well, the distance formula is related to Pythagorean theorem. So I'm going to kind of start with that angle of it. So first of all, what we're talking about is finding the distance between 2 points on a coordinate plane. Okay, so obviously I'm not talking about a vertical or horizontal distance. So what we say when we are talking about distance, a few things you should know: that distance is always positive because it's a measurement of how far one point is from the other. So we are finding the distance between 2 points on a graph or a coordinate plane. Okay, so basically, what we're going to do is create a right triangle and then use Pythagorean theorem. But the distance formula exists in that it's already set up to where it's just ready to go. We just plug everything in. So I'm just going to kind of go through to explain what's happening here. So I grabbed this piece of graph paper just because I had it. So let's just say for our first example, let's do, so for example 1, let's say we have the points 2, 4, and, gosh, I don't know, how about -3, -1. Okay. So let's say that we want to find the distance between these 2 points. So I'm just going to call this A and this B. So what I'm going to do is go over to the graph paper just to put this on a graph so you can visualize what's happening. So let's say I'm going to have this as my X. And you can just sketch this out because, I mean, I'm not doing anything amazing over here on this. And I'm going to make this as the Y. All right, so point A is 2, 4. So here is point A. And point B is -3, -1, which is right here. So here's point B. So what I am trying to do is figure out how far these points are on the graph. Now, if it was as simple as being like vertical or horizontal, we could just count spaces, but that's not what's happening here. So we are trying to figure out how far is it between point A and point B. All right, so what happens here is the easiest way to find the distance between these 2 points is to make a right triangle out of this situation. So I know if I drop down from here and go across from here, which, okay, I need to use a different color. That was kind of dumb. Hold on. Let's trade colors here. All right, so let me try this again so it just shows up. All right, so I have now created a right triangle. So I can see that this side is a length of 5. And this side right here is also a length of 5. So now I can use Pythagorean theorem to figure out what the length of this side is, which would be the C if we were using Pythagorean theorem, because AB is the hypotenuse. Okay, so we've talked about that we know A squared plus B squared equals C squared. But we also know that we can figure out what C is by taking A squared plus B squared and then taking the square root of it. Okay, so I'm just going to go over to the calculator and I can type it in exactly like that. So I'm going to do the square root of A squared plus B squared, and there's my decimal, 7.07. So I know that the distance between, and I think I'm just going to go 7.1. So I know that this piece right here is 7.1 units long. So basically, the distance formula is just using Pythagorean theorem. All right, now, what we want to say is that can we do this type of problem without drawing it on a graph? And the answer is absolutely, because here's the deal. I know that I'm just going to label this right here as side A, and this is side B. I don't know if I should say I always do, but I usually do the horizontal is the A and the vertical is the B. It doesn't make a difference, but all right. So what I'm going to say is that I know that A is going to be the distance between my two x's. Okay. So I'm going from -3 to +2 on the x-axis. So if I subtract those two numbers, I get 5. So if I were to say 2 minus -3, I get 5. So what I did right here is I just subtracted the x's. So A is what we get when we subtract the x's. All right, now right along with that is what happens with the C. So, with the B. So the B, I am finding the difference from -1 to +4. Well, if I subtract those two numbers, I get 5, which is how long this side is. So 4 minus -1 gives me 5. And to get that, I did y minus y. So that tells me that the B is the same as y minus y. So if I look at any two ordered pairs, I can compare the x's and say, if I were to subtract these two, I would get 5. So I know that side A is 5. And if I subtract these two y's, I'm going to get the length for side B, which again is 5. So here comes the distance formula. So the distance formula is the distance, okay, which technically we're finding side C, but that's okay, is the square root of a squared plus b squared. Okay, we've really already talked about that one. However, I know that I can find out what a is by subtracting the x's, and I can figure out what side B is by subtracting the y's. So here is the distance formula. And you know, they like to do x2 minus x1 and y2 minus y1, but it doesn't even matter because whatever order you subtract them in, you're going to square it, you're going to get a positive, so it doesn't matter at all. So this right here is the distance formula. All right, so let's try one without a graph. All right, so, and I'm just making these up, so, you know, we can, actually, I'm going to come over and write this one over here. Okay, so here we go, example 2. Let's say that, we'll say point C is 3, -12, and point D can be 9, 3. Why not? All right, so if I want to figure out the distance between C and D, I'm basically going to do a squared plus b squared equals c squared. So first off, how far are the x's apart? Well, the x's are 6 spaces apart. Okay, so I know side A is 6. Then I'm going to come over here and say, well, how far apart are the y's? I go from negative 12 on one of them to positive 3 on the other one. That's a difference of 15. So I know that side B is 15. So now I have a squared plus b squared, and then I need to take the square root of it and grab the calculator. Oops, clear that one off. All right, so I want 6 squared plus 15 squared, and then I want the square root of that, and I get 16.2. So the distance from C to D is approximately 16.2 units. So distance formula is just rearranging Pythagorean theorem. All right, so that's how you find the distance. Now let's talk about the midpoint. So if we go back to this graph right here, although this one isn't ideal, but that's fine, we can still do it. If I wanted to find the midpoint of this segment right here, that means I want to find the middle. So the middle in math is the average, or you could think of the middle as the median, but the middle of two numbers is just the average. So if I want to figure out the middle of this segment, then I need to average the x's together to find the middle of those, and then average the y's together to find the middle of those, and that will give me the midpoint. All right, so let's write this out. So first off, let's write that we are looking for the midpoint. So the midpoint is the point that's halfway across the segment. So the midpoint is the point that splits a segment into two equal pieces. So the midpoint is the middle. All right, so the midpoint is the middle. And the middle of two numbers is the average. All right, so let's use this example again. So we had that A is, so I guess I'll call this example 3. All right, so we had that A was 2, 4, and B is negative 3, negative 1. So if I want to find the middle of this piece right here, I need to average the x's together. Well, if I average the x's together, that means I add them up and divide by 2. So if I average the x's, I'm going to add them up and divide by 2, and I get negative 1/2. All right, and now I want to find the average of the y's. I'm just going to make this up here. So to average the y's together, I'm going to add those together and divide by 2. So that looks like 3/2. So according to this right here, the midpoint of AB, so the midpoint of AB should be at the point negative 1/2, 1.5. So let's look. Negative 1/2, 1.5. Yep, looks like we nailed it. So this right here, a lot of times we call the midpoint M. I'm going to call point M. All right, so midpoint's really easy. You just average the x's and average the y's. So here is what the formula for the midpoint looks like. All right, so the midpoint is, we're going to average the x's, and we're going to average the y's. So again, it doesn't matter which one you do first because you're adding them together. So this right here, and maybe I'll change colors here. This is the average of the x values, and this is the average of the y values. And if we average the x values and average the y values, we will find the point that's in the middle. Okay, so that's an introduction to how you use distance or find distance and midpoint. And again, there are two formulas, so maybe we should box this one in here. So for the midpoint, we just average the x's and average the y's. That's very straightforward. And then distance formula, it just comes from Pythagorean theorem.